Hey everyone, when we talk about the environmental crisis, we usually talk about things like carbon emissions, plastics in the ocean. And yeah, those are huge. But what if the problem goes way deeper than that? The source material we're digging into today makes a really bold claim that this isn't just an environmental crisis, it's actually a crisis of our entire civilization. So let's unpack that. And this is really the question at the heart of it all. What if the melting ice caps, the wildfires, the polluted rivers, what if those are just the symptoms? What if the root cause, the real disease, is a fundamental breakdown in how we think about nature itself? So the core argument here is that the ecological crisis isn't something we can just solve with better technology. It's a social problem, an ethical problem. It comes from this deep rupture in the relationship between humans and nature, a break that, believe it or not, has been developing for thousands of years. To really get this, our source takes us all the way back to the word ecology. It comes from two Greek words, oikos, which means home or household, and logos, which means science or study. So ecology literally is the science of our home. Now, that might sound simple, but it's a pretty radical idea, right? It asks us to stop seeing nature as this thing out there, separate from us, and to start seeing it as the actual home we all share. And today, we're basically caught in a tug of war between two completely different ways of seeing the world. On one side, you've got what the text calls capitalist modernity. This view sees nature as, well, basically a giant warehouse of stuff for us to take and use for profit. Then, on the other side, there's democratic modernity. This view says, whoa, hold on. Nature isn't a warehouse, it's a living, breathing system that we have to live with respectfully. And this clash of ideas, it's right at the center of our whole crisis. Okay, so to help us make sense of all this, the source gives us this really powerful three-part framework. And it all starts with the foundation, with what it calls first nature. First nature is essentially the world before we got here and started messing with it. It's the world of evolution, of ecosystems, of the natural cycles of water and carbon. It's the planet's fundamental operating system, working according to its own rules. It's the bedrock that all life, including our own, depends on. And here's where it gets super interesting. We often have this idea that nature is all survival of the fittest, red in tooth and claw. But the source points to the work of Peter Kropotkin, who argued that an estimated 95% of species actually live in cooperative societies. So mutual aid and cooperation might be just as fundamental to life as competition is. Kind of flips the script, doesn't it? So if that's first nature, the world as it is, what happens when humanity shows up? Well, the world we build on top of first nature is what our source calls second nature. Second nature is, well, it's everything we've built. It's our cities, our farms, our technologies, our languages, our ideas. It's how we've reshaped the world to fit our needs. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, for a long time, early human societies created a second nature that was actually pretty in sync with the world around them. But that relationship started to go sour. Way back in the Neolithic period, humans mostly lived in harmony with nature, even seeing it as sacred. But then, with the rise of hierarchies and states, that whole perspective shifted. Nature started being seen as an object, something to be dominated and controlled. And that idea went into overdrive with industrial capitalism, which basically treated the planet as an endless supply of fuel for the engine of profit. And check out this brilliant example of that shift in thinking. The source re-examines one of our oldest stories, the Epic of Gilgamesh. We usually read it as a story about a great hero. But if you look at it through this new lens, it becomes a story of ecological crime. Gilgamesh, the hero, chops down the sacred cedar forest, and its guardian, Humbaba, who's always painted as this evil monster, is suddenly recast as the very first ecological resistor, trying to protect his home from being destroyed. Okay, so our current second nature is clearly at odds with first nature. That's the problem. So what's the solution? This is where the source brings in its most hopeful and, frankly, visionary idea, third nature. Now, third nature isn't about trying to go back in time to some perfect, untouched past. That's not the goal. It's about consciously and intentionally building a new future. It's about creating a new kind of society where our technology, our politics, and our values are all designed from the ground up to work with ecological principles, not against them. The idea is that true human freedom can only happen in harmony with nature. So how do we even begin to build something like that? Well, it boils down to three key things. First, we need an ethical politics, where our decisions are always weighed against both social justice and ecological health. Second, we need harmonious technology, tools that actually support life instead of destroying it. And third, we need a new definition of freedom, one that understands you can't have a free people on a dead planet. Our liberation and the planet's health are totally intertwined.
And listen, this isn't just some abstract fantasy. The source is quick to point out that there are real-world communities and movements that are already trying to live out these principles. You've got examples like the Democratic Confederalism in Rojava, the Zapatista movement in Mexico, and even the sustainable farming models in Cuba. These examples show that another way of living really is possible.
So, at the end of the day, the really crucial takeaway is this. Changing our light bulbs and recycling is great, but it's not going to cut it. The ecological crisis is just a symptom of a much deeper sickness in our civilization, and the cure isn't just a new gadget or a quick technical fix. The source argues it requires a profound transformation of our society, our politics, and our entire way of seeing the world.
Ultimately, this whole framework challenges us to think about ecology as more than just a branch of science. It asks us to see it as a project of freedom for both us and the planet. And that leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. What would our world actually look like? What would our lives feel like if we really, truly started treating the Earth not as a thing to be used, but as our home?